In the year 1765, March, British Parliament announced the stamp tax. It was invoked in November of that same year, 1765. By April 1775, there was a full-fledged revolution going on in the 13 colonies. Now, because we have 200 years of history, we can look back and we can see that it was a mistake. But the leaders of Britain at the time were so out of touch with the people in the 13 colonies. They didn't understand them. In 1765, the men that they were dealing with had basically helped Britain win a war against France for the continent, and Britain wanted to make the colonists pay for the war, right or wrong. I mean, like, uh, you know, it wasn't a big tax, but it was the principle of it, I guess. Now, how does that, you know, like, this has colored the American psyche for the last 200 years. Americans don't want taxation without representation. And what's going on today with the Wall Street protests, or the Occupy Everywhere protests that are going on? You're seeing a small group starts to protest on Wall Street. 3 weeks ago? Yeah, I think it's 3 weeks ago today. And now it's spread right across the country. No end in sight. You have people lining up for and against it. It's very clear what people, it's very clear that the people who are protesting are fed up with the way that government. Sorry about that. I just kicked the stand. The way that government and the corporations and Wall Street have manipulated everything to sort of like, and the banks, to, if we are successful and make a profit, we get to keep it. If we make a loss, we'll hand it off to the people and they'll pay it. And this debt is basically taxation with representation. You can talk to 50,000, 100,000 people in the streets and ask them, right? Is this fair? Of course, they're going to say no. Now, of course, the out of touch part, where the banks, government, corporations, the elites, think we can do this because we've manipulated the laws to do this, so on and so forth. And the American people, up until now, have just been. But it's a funny thing. There's a quote. I don't know who said it. They said, and this was said about the British, and it was said about the British in, I believe, in the Second World War or the First World War. I'm not sure. So, the British people are loath to fight. But when the fight comes, they fight like tigers. And this is the same way with American people. I mean, this is a fight. I think this is the war, not the warning. I think this is the beginning of something that could get very nasty unless all parties, and I mean this, all parties are going to have to sit down and talk about this. And they're going to, the banks are going to have to take a hit. Wall Street is going to have to take a hit. They don't want to, right? At this point, they're saying, we don't want to do this. Listen, we made this money and blah, 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 we're keeping it. Well, you know what? Unless they do take the hit, and banks are allowed to fail, and corporations are allowed to fail that are being propped up, And jobs are and that's another thing. They had better start creating jobs, because right now there's 30 million unemployed in the United States, and they got nothing better to do, so they may as well go down to the protest, right? You have people who've lost their homes. Do you know how pissed off people get when that happens? I mean, they are angry. And you have, like, like they say, well, this is just the left wing, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? You got a lot of people down there that they may be right of or left of center, but on the other side, you have the Tea Party group, right? And you know what? They're being manipulated to a degree, but ultimately, I can see the Tea Party group and the Occupy group coming together. And, you know, something that I noticed, because I'm an ex-soldier, right? I noticed something the other day when I was watching some of the protests. It was the officers that were doing the pepper spraying and the pounding with the nightsticks. There wasn't too many of the rank and file doing it, and I wondered about that, and I still wonder about that. Is it possible that they're just basically saying, well, we lost, our pension fund has been decimated by Wall Street. Hey, we're backing these guys, and that's another thing that they're going to have to look at, right? Um, you know, in a lot of places, police and firefighters and government employees, their pensions are being decimated and they're being attacked, right? I think this, if this continues, and this could get way out of control. If the government, the elites, and corporations react with violence, the world will never be the same. I really do think that it's this serious, right? And this is why I want everybody to sit down and talk. And, uh, one thing that bothers me, and it was just after the fall of the Soviet Union. I was up watching something on, I think it was either Nightline or one of those nighttime things, might have been on CNN or CBC or whatever. And they had a bunch of eggheads on there talking, and one of them said, well, now we can get back to the pre-1914 social structure. Now, if anybody's read any history, the pre-1914 social structure was a very tiny elite group of super rich, and everybody else was, you had a small group of clerks who made just a little bit better than the laborers. In 1917, my grandfather made $9 a week. Um, in today's dollars, it would be about $180 a week. So people were pretty poor. And but the communists terrified the elites so much that they had, and I've heard this term, a social contract, where they would be, the elites would behave themselves, but with the fall of the Soviet Union, all of a sudden, where do people go? Another thing that they should be looking at is the French Revolution. In the French Revolution, one of the main causes for the French Revolution, as I understand it, is that France had been basically at war from 1700 to 1780. They were totally bankrupt. And when they had to come up with money, instead of taxing the rich and the elite, who these wars were basically fought for, they went after the middle class. it was the middle class that led the revolution in France. In the United States, or in the 13 colonies, it was the middle class that led the revolution. In Russia, regardless of the propaganda and the crap, Lenin came from the middle class. Most of the main leaders of the Russian Revolution were middle class, well educated. And you can brutalize the poor all you want, but when you start to brutalize the middle class and you start going after their pensions and the they're talking about gold-plated pensions and these gold-plated salaries of teachers and so on and so forth. Teachers are smart, and they have a lot of historians. And when you start to do stuff like that, you're really making a mistake. And I see one mistake after another after another. Obama, or BO as I like to call him, he should be bringing in all parties concerned, and they should have a commission, and the people who committed crimes, financial fraud, should be arrested, tried, put in jail, as was the savings alone back in the 80s. These people all went to jail. The crap that went down in 2008, nobody went to jail. The government just handed over trillions of dollars. So, this is, I wanted to put this out there simply because as an amateur historian, and I'm not the best educated person in the world, but I have read a lot of history. And when you have something on this scale begin to develop, it can have a tendency to get out of hand. The Boston Massacre happened in 1770, and basically there was 4 people killed and 5 people wounded. And the propagandists for the revolutionaries used that event to propel the 13 colonies into the revolution. And, if the protesters are attacked in some way, and I think that will happen because listening to some of the elite talking heads, the way they're talking about the Occupy Wall Street people and some of the propaganda that I have seen or some of the pieces I have seen, man, I'm telling you, I think they're going to make the same mistakes that the British made in the 1770s. And this will just become unbelievably insane. And the world will never be the same. Anyway, I'll be putting more stuff up.